There's someone you know who has a bag packed. Not for vacation, not for a weekend trip. It's a bag that sits in a closet, or by the back door, or in the trunk of a car. And it's filled with things most people don't think about until it's too late. Flashlights, water purification tablets, a first aid kit that could handle a small war, cash in small bills because what if the ATMs go down? And if you ask them why, they'll give you a calm, reasonable answer. Something about being practical, something about common sense. But there's a story underneath that answer. One that has almost nothing to do with emergencies and almost everything to do with a feeling they've carried since before they can remember. The feeling that the ground beneath their feet could disappear at any moment. And that when it does, nobody is coming to help. You've met this person. Maybe you live with them. They're the one who checks the weather 3 times before leaving the house. The one who always knows where the exits are in any building, any restaurant, any theater. They keep the gas tank above half. Always. They have backup phone chargers, extra medications, a mental map of every route home in case the main roads are blocked. They're your coworker who has a drawer full of protein bars and a phone list printed on actual paper, because what if the network goes down? They're your partner who lies awake running scenarios in their head. Not nightmares exactly, more like rehearsals. They're the friend who, when everyone else is laughing about some disaster movie, gets a little quiet. Not because they're scared, because they've already thought about it, in detail, and they have a plan. Most people look at this and think it's a quirk, maybe a little paranoid, maybe a little much, but here's what almost nobody understands. That preparation isn't really about the disaster. It never was. Picture this. You're 7 years old, maybe 6, and something happens in your house that nobody warned you about. Maybe it's a fight that erupts out of nowhere between 2 people you depend on for everything. Maybe it's a phone call that changes the look on your mother's face, and suddenly the whole house feels different, but nobody tells you why. Maybe the lights go out because the bill didn't get paid, and your parents pretend it's an adventure. Candles on the kitchen table, but you can feel the weight of what they're not saying. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe someone you trusted just left one day, went to the store, went to work, went for a drive, and didn't come back when they said they would, or didn't come back at all. You're too young to understand the details, but you're not too young to understand the feeling. That feeling is this. The world can change without warning, and you won't see it coming, and when it happens, you will be alone with it. A study published in the journal Development and Psychopathology found that children who experience unpredictable environments, not necessarily abusive but chaotic, inconsistent, or emotionally unstable, develop what researchers call a threat detection bias. In plain language, their brains learn to scan for danger the way a smoke detector scans for heat. Constantly, automatically, even when the air is perfectly clear. The brain doesn't do this because it's broken. It does this because, at one point, it was the smartest thing the brain could do to keep that child safe. And here's the part that most people don't see. That smoke detector never turns off. It just gets quieter. It moves to the background. It hums beneath every normal day like a frequency only they can hear. And decades later, that child is an adult with an emergency bag in the closet and a flashlight in every room and a plan for scenarios that, statistically, will probably never happen. And when someone asks them why, they say it's just common sense. Because explaining the real reason would mean going back to that kitchen, to those candles, to that feeling of the floor opening up beneath them when they were too small to even name what was happening. Now, what's happening inside this person's mind is more sophisticated than simple fear. Psychologists call it hypervigilance, but that word makes it sound like a disorder. And for some, maybe it is. But for most of these people, it's something more nuanced. It's a finely tuned system of pattern recognition that was built in an environment where noticing things early was the difference between being okay and being blindsided. Their brains learned to play chess with reality, not one move ahead. 5, 10, what if this happens, then what? And if that fails, then what? They run simulations the way engineers stress test bridges, not because they want the bridge to collapse, because they need to know it won't. And the cruel irony is that the simulation never stops. Because the part of the brain that runs it, the amygdala, the anterior cingulate cortex, the whole threat processing network, it doesn't understand that the environment has changed. It's still operating on the rules it learned in that kitchen, in that living room, in that house where the ground moved without warning. There's something they do that looks like control, and on the surface, that's what it is. The pantry stocked with canned goods, the binder with insurance documents and emergency contacts, the rehearsed conversation in their head about what they'd say to their kids if something happened. It looks organized. It looks prepared. It looks like someone who has their life together more than most people. But underneath, what's really driving it is a question they can never fully answer. A question that lives in their chest, not their head. And the question is this: am I safe right now? Not in a dramatic panic attack way, more like a low-grade hum that never fully resolves, like a note held just below the threshold of hearing. They've learned to function beautifully on top of that hum. They go to work, they laugh at dinner, they show up for their kids, but the hum is always there. And every preparation, every backup plan, every extra battery and bottled water and mental rehearsal is an attempt to answer that question, to quiet that hum, even for a moment. And here's the contradiction that defines them. They're simultaneously the most prepared people in any room and the least at peace. They can handle a crisis better than almost anyone because they've already lived through it in their minds 100 times. But they can't sit in a quiet room on a Sunday afternoon without some part of their brain whispering, what if? What if the call comes? What if the thing happens? What if this piece is just the inhale before something breaks? At work, they're the ones everyone turns to when things go sideways. Not because they volunteered, because they were already 3 steps into solving the problem before anyone else finished panicking. Their boss sees efficiency. Their coworkers see calm under pressure. What nobody sees is that the calm isn't calm at all. It's familiarity. They're not relaxed in a crisis. They're just home. In relationships, it gets more complicated. They love deeply, but they love with their hands on the emergency brake. There's this moment that happens, and if you've lived it, you'll know exactly what I mean. Someone they care about says something like, "I'll always be here." And instead of feeling comforted, something tightens in their chest. Not because they don't believe it, but because they've heard that before, or something like it. And the person who said it last time didn't stay, so they smile, they say thank you. And somewhere behind their eyes, a quiet calculation begins. What would I do if this person left? How would I survive it? Where would I go? They're not planning to leave. They're not expecting betrayal. They're just making sure that if the floor drops again, they won't fall all the way down. Research from the University of Minnesota's Institute of Child Development found that adults who grew up in unpredictable environments show measurably higher levels of contingency planning in their daily lives, even during periods of objective safety and stability. The researchers described it as a form of psychological insurance. The person isn't responding to current danger. They're prepaying for a catastrophe that may never arrive. But there's a part of this story that doesn't get told. The part that happens at 2 in the morning when the house is quiet and everyone else is asleep. That's when the weight of it lands, not the fear of disaster, something worse, the exhaustion of never being able to stop, the loneliness of carrying a burden that nobody around them can see. Because to the outside world, they look fine, better than fine. They look like they have everything handled. And they do. That's the problem. They always have everything handled. And there is nobody in their entire life who thinks to ask if they're okay. Because why would anyone worry about the person who's always prepared? Why would anyone check on the person who never seems to need anything? And that's the truth that never gets said. What they feel every single day but have never once said out loud. They are tired. Not physically tired, though they are that too. They are tired of being the one who holds the rope. Tired of scanning every room for what could go wrong. Tired of loving people with one hand on the exit map. They are tired of the fact that the thing that keeps them safe is the same thing that keeps them from ever fully resting. And if they're being honest, really honest, in that 2 in the morning kind of way, what they want more than anything isn't a better plan. It's permission to stop planning. Just for a day. Just for an afternoon. just long enough to feel what it's like to trust that the ground will hold. Psychologist Bessel van der Kolk, who spent decades studying how the body stores trauma and survival responses, describes this pattern in a way that cuts right to the bone. He says the body keeps the score. It remembers what the conscious mind has learned to manage. And for people who prepare for disasters that never come, the body remembers a time when not being ready meant not being safe. The conscious mind says, I know I'm fine. The body says, are you sure? And the body always wins, not loudly, not dramatically, just persistently, in the tight shoulders, the shallow breathing at night, the way their eyes sweep a room before they sit down, the way they can never quite let the last thought go before sleep. But here's what nobody recognizes about these people. And this is the part that matters. That hypervigilance, that relentless preparation, that ability to see around corners that other people don't even know exist, it makes them extraordinary in ways the world takes for granted. They are the ones who keep families together during real emergencies. They are the ones at work who see the problem 6 months before it arrives and quietly prevent it without ever getting credit. They're the friend who shows up with exactly what you need before you've even asked, because they've already thought about what you might need. They've already played it through. Their love, when they let themselves give it fully, is the most thorough love you will ever receive. Because they don't love carelessly. They love with foresight. They love with backup plans, not because they expect to lose you, but because losing you would be the one disaster they cannot prepare for. And that, if you understand it, is not paranoia. It is the deepest form of devotion a person can offer. I have imagined a world without you, and I have built a way to survive it, but I am praying every day that I never have to use it. The strength and the wound live in the same place. They always have. That child who learned to listen for footsteps, who learned to read a room before walking into it, who learned that safety was something you built yourself because no one was going to build it for you, that child became an adult who can hold the world together with duct tape and willpower and a flashlight that always has fresh batteries. And that is not a small thing. That is a kind of quiet heroism that almost nobody sees. And now they exist in a world that has never been louder with warnings. News cycles that run on fear. Algorithms that feed them the exact scenarios their brains have been rehearsing since childhood. Climate reports, economic forecasts, pandemic protocols. For most people, these are background noise. For them, each one is a confirmation. See, I was right to worry. I was right to prepare. The world is proving me right every single day. And the tragedy is that it is. The world does keep proving them right, but the cost of being right is that they never get to rest. They parent differently too. They are the parents who child-proof everything twice, who research car seats for 40 hours, who know the signs of every childhood illness and have the pediatrician's number memorized. Their children are safe, incredibly safe, but sometimes, late at night, they wonder if they're teaching their kids the same thing they learned. That the world is something to brace for, that peace is temporary, that you always need a plan. And that question, that quiet worry that they might be passing the hum to the next generation, that might be the heaviest thing they carry. They are still writing this story. Every day, they negotiate between the part of them that knows they are safe and the part that will never fully believe it. Some of them are learning, slowly, to let a day pass without checking, to sit in a room without mapping the exits, to hear someone say, I'll always be here, and let the words land without building a contingency around them. It's not easy. It might be the hardest thing they ever do, harder than any disaster they've ever prepared for, because preparing for disaster is familiar. Trusting that disaster won't come, that requires a kind of courage they were never taught. The truth about people who prepare for disasters that never come is simpler than any diagnosis and more complicated than any label. They are not anxious. They are not paranoid. They are not broken. They are people who learned, long before they had the language for it, that the world does not always warn you before it changes. And they decided, somewhere deep in the architecture of who they are, that they would never be caught without a way through. And somewhere inside them, that child is still standing in that kitchen, still watching the candles flicker, still listening for footsteps, still making sure that this time, if the lights go out, they'll know exactly where the flashlight is. They don't need you to tell them they're safe. They just need you to understand why they can't stop making sure. If any part of this story felt like yours or like someone you carry in your heart, please subscribe. And if you want to support these stories and the work behind them, hit that join button to become a member. I would genuinely appreciate having you here. There's more to tell whenever you're ready.